Master actors always find humor. Funny is money and charming is disarming. And I did not expect that coming from him. I was thinking that this was going to be some fancy hoity-toity acting coach, and it was where everyone was going to be all proper. So coming from a stand-up and sketch background, immediately I was hooked, and I was like, oh, humor, funny is money. This guy's into humor and into comedy. I am on board. And that's a huge part of Tom's philosophy in acting and in life is nobody ever dumped someone or broke up with someone because they were too funny. And nobody ever didn't give someone an acting job because they were too funny as well. So he always talks about the negatives are always written in the script. It's our job as actors and as human beings to find the humor and to find a positivity and also find the love. So that's one of my favorite things. And that was the first note I ever took. And if there's a note that I need to continually return to, even though I am a stand-up comic and do a lot of comedy, it's still find the funny, and funny is money and charming is disarming. Yeah. So there's one.
Because I always think as actors, there's always this little voice inside us that's like, we need to do the tragedy, or we need to be like the heartthrob in order to become a successful actor, in order to be the successful actor. And that's not true. And like we've seen throughout film, the characters that we gravitate towards have tons and tons of humor, and like have such this like dry sense of humor. And I always think of the best example, which Tom always gives, is Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs, and Anthony Hopkins' performance, because there's a ton of humor, there's a ton of mischief, and like that's it's fantastic.
Which on paper, if you were to read that script, probably an awful, horrifying thing of a cannibalistic serial killer who's raping and murdering women and men. Maybe I forget that story, but even the Buffalo Bill side of things was awful. So it's like, why would you ever want that? But what Anthony Hopkins did is he brought so much charm and positivity and humor and fun to that role, where then as a character, he just became this fascinating guy. And you find yourself watching that and you're like, why do I like this fucking horrible human being? And you like him because he's charming and he's disarming, which is probably something to say about some serial killers, how they reel people in. They always say like, oh, he was such a nice guy. And he always seemed like such a neighborly fella, you know? Not obviously advocating for serial killers here, but I am advocating for finding the humor and finding the positivity in your life and in your work. And you're right. A lot of times we think it's got to be serious and, oh, it's emotion and it's about emoting and I got to cry and I got to cry on command and I got to be this serious person, especially with things like some classical plays like Shakespeare or Chekhov, where it's like, oh, it's just such a serious time. And then it ends up being horrendous and boring and terrible to watch. And it feels bad to even perform that stuff when you perform it that way, because you're like, there's no life in it. And the biggest problem with it is it's not truthful. It's not real, because in real life, humans find humor in the worst of scenarios. At funerals with your family, someone will break the tension with a little crack, and you find some levity and some love in what's an otherwise terrible situation. After natural disasters, people figure out, how do we carry on? And it's through singing a song and having some fun and cracking some jokes. And even in like the worst of worst scenarios, if you read books about the Holocaust and things like that, how do people get through that? They got through it by remaining positive and remaining upbeat in their mind, despite the horrific scenarios that they were involved in. So find the funny, find the humor. Funny is money, charming is disarming.